Hi, I'm Veronica and welcome to my channel. Today's video is the second part where I show you micro movements. Micro movements are very subtle and gentle movements that actually can make a huge difference in the way you feel. They really can mobilize lots of joints in your spine. They can make your fascia more hydrated, and they are perfect for people who do not want to move too much for a variety of reasons. So it might be due to chronic pain, it might be due to chronic fatigue, or perhaps if this is, you might be in that state of the frozen state, the frozen mode of your nervous system, where you're kind of very low in energy, and sometimes it's also combined with some depressive mood or states. But it also works great if you want to move a little bit, but it's socially awkward, like for example at work when you're sitting at the desk. You can do these really subtle things that can make you feel better and keep moving rather than stay seated for a long period of time. So if you haven't done it yet, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any new video. And this practice is done seated in a chair. The first thing that you have to keep in mind when you're going to do it seated in a chair is to choose the chair where you can keep your feet flat and firmly on the ground. So if the chair is higher, if you're a little bit shorter and you feel like you barely touch the ground, or maybe your heels are in the air, then make sure that you place something underneath your feet, like books or blocks, whatever you might have. And ideally, try not to prop yourself against the back of a chair. Now, of course, it's going to depend on your situation, but if you have to use the back of the chair, then it's best to keep something like a folded blanket or maybe a small cushion behind your lower back, so that that gives you the support, but you're not getting into that collapsed shape where your back is rounded and when you tilt the pelvis backward. So this is going to be important. Okay, so once you found your position in the chair, we're going to start with some subtle movements. And to begin with, let's do rolling over the sit bones. So it is a very subtle movement. It doesn't really need to, you don't really need to go all the way with it, but it really helps you to find an effortless place to sit. So it's useful to start with it. So you can feel your sit bones depending on how hard the chair is. Also, I would really not recommend to sit on something too soft, because then you don't get enough feedback. So the sit bones are the bones that are right in the middle of your buttocks. And if you would lift one buttock at a time, you might feel that there is this bone right in the center that is in the contact with the seat of the chair. So when we do the pelvic tilt, when you roll over the sit bones, the pelvis tilts forward, and that's the sensation of being in front of your sit bones. You're rolling in front of your sit bones. And then if you allow your pelvis to tilt backward, and that is going to include your back rounding, maybe your head dropping, that's when you roll behind your sit bones. Now I'm doing it in a very exaggerated way right now, but it can be very subtle. You might be a little bit more in front of your sit bones, a little bit behind. So I'll show you the same now from the side. So you tilt the pelvis forward, and that makes you more forward, ahead, or in front of your sit bones, however you want to think of it. And then you let your pelvis tilt backward, and that's when you're more behind your sit bones. And you go how far it's okay for you. So it might be something quite subtle, like I'm doing right now, just a little bit of movement, but it does wonders. It's really good movement for your pelvis, for your spine, for all the fascia along that back line. And the slower you go, the more sensation you get. So it's very useful. And as you might see right now, even when I'm doing this rather subtle movement, as the pelvis is connected with the spine, you will see that my spine responds to that as well, all the way towards the neck and head. So there's a little bit of rounding when the pelvis is rotated backwards, and a little bit of arching when the pelvis is rotating forward. And as you go through it a couple of times, allowing the rest of the body to participate, you might eventually land somewhere where it feels you right in the center, the very center of your sit bones. And that's usually the place where it feels most stable, especially if your feet are firmly on the ground. And you don't need to put too much of muscular tension in your abdomen or in your back to stay upright. Okay, so this is the movement number 1. Now, movement number 2, which is also quite useful to begin with, is a circular movement for the head. But it's not the movement that allows your chin to drop. That's very often too much for the neck. So imagine that your head is inside a tube or some sort of cylinder, and it cannot drop to the side or forward or backward, but it can move along the walls, inside walls of that cylinder, like this. So the movement is a little bit like when you see the Indian dancers, they kind of shift the head right and left without actually letting it drop. So here it's a circular movement like that. And it does take a little bit of training. It does take quite a bit of an attention, but it's very useful because you connect to various parts of the body that you might not feel normally. So it's an important part of going through that dissociation or freeze that you might experience. Okay, so it goes like this. It's a super subtle movement of the head moving on top of your spine in a circular movement without actually dropping. No dropping the chin or the ear. That doesn't happen. It's only the movement of the head around its own axis. And you might imagine that you have your head and your hair and face covered in paint, and that you want to paint the inside of that cylinder as you move like this. So you're actually not turning the head sideways either. As you can see, the nose is pointing forward all the time. And you might check whether you're not making this movement, with your upper body or any other part of the body that is quite isolated to the head itself. And it's a super subtle movement, but it really does quite an amazing job in allowing your head eventually to rest in that place where it feels lightest at the top of the neck. And again, it makes it much easier and more comfortable to sit upright after that. And you will notice that it gets a little bit tedious or tiring after a short while. So take it in small portions, always. Always stay within what is comfortable for you for this moment. If it's 1 or 2 circles, let it be 1 or 2, and maybe the next day it's gonna be 3 circles, and then another day 4 circles. So there's no need to speed it up or to push it beyond your limits. So a very similar, really subtle movement that will affect the part of the body that usually we don't move is the movement of your rib cage. So here you might even place your hand, the opposite hand, on the side of the rib cage and make a movement that you know it's starting not from the hip and not from the shoulder, but from the rib cage itself, from the ribs itself. And it's as if you wanted to push that hand away using your ribs. Your ribs push your hand away. And again, it might be the subtlest of the movements for you. The ribs push the rib cage out to the side a little bit, and then it returns to the center. You push it and it returns. So this is one direction that you can explore. And it might be that you want to stay with that right-left movement, changing the hands, resting the hand over the rib cage, and pushing the rib cage into the hand so that you feel that your rib cage slides in space. It slides a little bit out to the side. And once you explore the sliding movement, right, left, you might explore also a little bit of forward, backward movement when it's the rib cage. So not the pelvis, not the head, but really the rib cage that moves back in space. And again, it's subtle. You're not going for a big movement. It's really subtle. And it might also move forward. Like your ribs want to touch the hand that is right in front of them. Back and forward, back and forward. And again, it might take a long time to actually get any feel there or any mobility there. So stay with this right, left, and forward, backward movement for as many days or weeks as you wish before you proceed to combining it into a circular motion. And it's very similar to what we just did with the neck. It's a rotation around its own axis. So if the center is your spine, your ribcage rotates around it in this way. And of course, there will be a response from your shoulders. There might be some tiny response from the hips, but it's very different from moving your whole torso in space, or your shoulders in space, or your pelvis. It's really that ribcage that moves. And the rest only responds because everything is interconnected. Yes, so that's another option. And there are a few more options for the gentle movement of the shoulders and the neck. So here again, if at any point you start feeling that you need a little bit support behind, don't drop, but get some little blanket or a pillow so that you can stay upright. And let's try a movement that starts with the shoulder that's moving forward. I have a whole video that breaks it down a little bit more, so here I will speed it up. The shoulder moving forward, that's when you feel that there's a little bit less space in the front of the chest, almost as if the front of the shoulder there wanted to touch the sternum, the breastbone. So that's the forward movement. The backward movement doesn't start from the elbow. The arm is really floppy, it's relaxed. It's again the shoulder moving back. And that is the sensation of your shoulder blade coming closer towards your spine. So this is a forward and backward movement coming from the shoulder. The arm is super limp, it doesn't do anything. And it's also not the whole torso moving, it's just the shoulder. So once you've got that, both on the right side and on the left side, and again, this alone, that sensation that you have a control over your shoulder alone, rather than it's your arm doing the job or the whole torso, it might take you days or weeks. So I'm showing you something that you might start doing after a longer while. There's no need to rush it. But once you've got that forward and backward movement, you can start moving one shoulder forward and the other backward at the same time. One shoulder forward, the other backward. And you can repeat it on one side first. And rather than trying to keep your head still artificially, as that's going to create tension, allow your head or neck move in whichever direction it wants to move in response to that. So there's an effort of a movement, and then there is a release. And that release can be longer for you. You might want to take a longer break and then try again. And again, it's not about making this movement, this range of movement as big as possible. It can be really subtle, but it's definitely going to create quite a difference to how it feels for the whole upper body. So once you've done that in one side, you can try how it would be on the other side, where one shoulder moves forward, the other one moves backward in space. You might do it in a particular breathing rhythm. You might choose when you prefer to inhale, when you prefer to exhale. So you can experiment with that, but make sure that you're not holding the breath when you do that. So you keep breathing and ideally in a rhythm that is synchronizing the movement with the breath. Right. So then you might start switching and maybe even adding the head and very gently turning the head towards the shoulder that's moving forward and then returning to the center. So little head turn. And my hands are moving, but it's not that I'm moving from the hands. That would be very different. If I started the movement from the hands, that's how it would look like. They move because they move a tiny bit because my shoulders move and because they are connected. You might even notice how it would be if you followed with the whole torso that shoulder that is going backward. And how far is the comfortable range of motion for you. So this is the most important thing to consider. You're not forcing anything. You don't want to reach in any particular place. You're moving within your comfortable range of motion. And it might be very different on the right side and on the left side. So don't think that you have to match it, that you have to make it symmetrical. It doesn't need to. Again, best to add the breath. Maybe exhale when you slide the shoulder back. Gentle movement. As you can see, it's subtle enough to do it even in the office. And there might be even a little bit of response with this movement in the position of your hips or your pelvis and of your knees. One knee might be moving a little bit forward, one and then the other. Let that happen. So make it like a small and very gentle whole body movement. And then you can return to the center. Notice how it feels. I hope you enjoyed this short practice, and if so, please don't forget to click the like button and to subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Now, if you searched for this practice because you do suffer from chronic pain or you are in pain right now, then check my website www.withmeta.eu, from where you can download a short audio first aid for pain, where I guide you through a practice that can make you feel better. You can download it for free, and I will link it in the description below. See you next week.